with the gifts from our authors and the blessings of our friends. This is why we fellowship and we will never end. Sister, sister, book by book, we are go-on girls. Book by book, sister to sister, book by book, we are go-on girls. As we travel life's journey, we are growing day by day, gaining power, strength, and purpose all along the way, with the gifts from our authors and the blessings of our friends. This is why we fellowship and we will never end. Book by book, sister to sister, book by book, we are go-on girls. Book by book, sister to sister, book by book, we are go-on girls.
Welcome, and thank you for joining us today for Conversations with GOG. I'm Linda Johnson, co-founder and president of Go On Girl Book Club. For 30 years, our organization has read and supported authors from the African diaspora. These series of conversations with authors and people in the book publishing industry, from editors to Black booksellers, are created to connect us to all the inner workings of book publishing. Go On Girl Book Club is a literary sisterhood of dedicated book-loving and reading women in 50 chapters in 16 states and 40 cities who read a variety of genres written by Black authors. Today, we are so excited to have with us Eddie S. Glaude Jr., and today's Go On Girl co-hosts are Daphne Pierre from our New York 18 chapter and Julia Chance from our New York 1 chapter. I'm now turning it over to Daphne.
Hi, everyone, and welcome. I'd like to introduce to you Eddie Glaude Jr., Chair of African American Studies at Princeton University and author of books such as Democracy in Black, In the Shades of Blue, and now Begin Again, James Baldwin's America and Its Urgent Lessons for Our Own. Hi, Eddie, how are you?
How you doing? I'm doing well. I'm doing well. It's great to see you.
I'm so excited to talk to you today. You have no idea. I root for you in my living room anytime you come across my screen, whether it's on Bill Maher, Morning Joe, when you're reading these conservative folks. I absolutely love it. I think you're phenomenal. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited. Thank you, President Johnson, and all the chapters and folks who are out there reading the book. I really appreciate you. And I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Great. How's it been on your book tour so far?
Oh, it's been amazing, to be honest with you.
You've been busy.
Yeah, I've been really tethered to this chair.
Yeah.
Behind has been tethered to this chair and this computer screen, but it's been a wonderful journey in the midst of a painful season.
Right.
And so I think the book has resonated because we are in these trying times, and the subject matter of the book is, in fact, the underlying reasons or causes for those times, I think. Yeah.
Got it. Well, I've spent some time with this book, and I can tell you, you've done such a phenomenal job with I think in my head, I'm friends with James Baldwin. And I guess you are too, because you refer to him a lot as Jimmy in a lot of ways that I've seen. Let's just actually get into it. So what I wanted to share with you is that when I was reading this book, you painted such imagery, right? For me, where I can literally see Mr. Baldwin next to me, to a point where at times I would see like a mirage, like you would be talking about him. I can feel his feelings. I can see his just body language, and sometimes even I can imagine times when he's sitting with Lucienne or somebody. Like there's one day I remember reading something in the book, and I imagine him sitting in France at a cafe. John Coltrane's Sentimental Mood is playing, and Lucienne is talking his ear off about something, but he's looking off into the abyss, thinking about America. That's how much of a color you implemented for me when reading this book. So kudos to you, brother, for sure.
Thank you.
All right, so first question would be describe how you came to know the works of James Baldwin. How old were you when you started to read his first book, or one of his books?
Well, I encountered him briefly in undergrad at Morehouse. I have to say that I'm a Morehouse man, by the way. I just had to let everyone know.
We know.
I encountered him at Morehouse, but I wasn't mature enough to grapple with him, I don't think. And in graduate school, and the same thing. I wasn't really mature enough to answer the questions he was asking of me. Plus, I was annoyed and unsettled that when I read him in my classes in graduate school, as I write in the book, he would leave, the faces of the white folks flush and their cheeks red and the like, and because Baldwin's prose is uncompromising, you see, and they were uncomfortable, and I had to navigate and negotiate their uncomfortableness. And I didn't like that. So it wasn't really until, I would say, 2000 that I really started reading him seriously and closely. And that's when I started teaching it. I was at Bowdoin College in Maine, and in Brunswick, Maine. And I would teach this class called Introduction to African American Cultural Practices.
In Maine?
And I would, in Maine, yeah, can you imagine? It was cold. I would teach Toni Morrison's Beloved. And then right after I taught Beloved, I would teach The Fire Next Time. And I would see the way the students responded. Mm-hmm. And I was like, okay, and as I was reading him, he was forcing me to ask different sorts of questions, not only of him, but of myself. And then boom. So I've been reading him for about 30 years now, closely. But it was in the classroom where I saw the words land, the formulations land with my students, that I started reading him closely.
Interesting. So coming off of that, in the introduction, you shared that you evaded Baldwin, right? Mm-hmm. What, especially with his essays, it made you turn inward to confront your own pain philosophically. Yeah. Additionally, in Raoul Peck's 2016 documentary, I Am Not Your Negro, Mr. Baldwin has resurfaced in popular culture, and he's also frequently quoted in conversations and in writings about race, such as archival footage coming up, in networking programs and speeches. Talk about your approach to Baldwin's legacy. What about it and his wisdom do you set to amplify?
So, the spine of Begin Again, the heart of the book, is my engagement with No Name in the Street. Baldwin's book in 1972. Mm-hmm. And it's the first book he publishes after his attempted suicide and after the assassination of Dr. King. And it's a book that many people, I think, prior to Begin Again, really didn't settle down in, right? It was kind of unwieldy. They didn't know what he was trying to do in some ways, because there's this kind of standard reading of Baldwin that the later Baldwin, he isn't as disciplined. He has succumbed to a kind of polemic or the politics of the moment, that he's given up his aesthetic. for politics, that he's bitter, his rage has overwhelmed his pen. And I just disagree with that so passionately. So the Baldwin that's at the heart of Begin Again is the late Baldwin. And it's because in some ways, you can't turn the late Baldwin into Santa Claus. You know, he's going to tell you exactly what the gut requires him to say, right? And so I think that it is precisely that reintroduction of him that is the inspiration in part. But I should say something about, you know, you began by talking about, you know, my hesitancy and how he forced me to turn inward. You know, writing about Jimmy is very difficult. He's one of the greatest writers the Western world has ever produced. And I wasn't really writing about him. I'm arrogant enough to believe that I could write with him. Right. And so, and part of what I had to figure out, I didn't want to imitate him on the page. I didn't want to try to sound like him. You know, I wanted to be me. And Baldwin kept saying, you know, in my ear, Jimmy kept, son, come on now, you know, if you're going to do this, you must take the jump. Come on. And or he would cuss me out in my head or something like that. And then finally, I realized that I had to confront the fact that I'm this vulnerable little boy who still got daddy issues, right? That I grew up on the coast of Mississippi in this family where my dad deposited fear in my gut from an early age. And I've been trying to prove that I was courageous ever since, that I'm courageous ever since. And so once I made that leap, suddenly the sentences started to jump. He was like, okay, now let's go. Come, let's walk together. So it was precisely in understanding that when Jimmy says that the unexamined life is not worth living, he means that shit. He means it. And that means that the messiness of the world is more than likely a reflection of the messiness inside of you.
Inside of you, I agree wholeheartedly.
Yeah, so you got to deal with that. You have to deal with that as a precondition to say anything about the world, you know?
Yeah.
So that, yeah.
Well, I must say that actually came across in your writing. It really did. For me, in reading it, I felt the audacity that you had in feeling like you were writing with him. And there are times that it does seem like he's directing you. He was guiding your pen. And I don't think it was an accident that when you took your car ride to, when you were in the taxi with the driver in France, and you were saying you plan on going to his house, he said, no, you have to go now.
Yeah.
I don't think that was by accident at all.
It was so deep, right? Because, you know, I had on these cream colored jeans, some Air Force Ones, this linen blue shirt. I'm getting off a plane in Nice. And this guy looked like he was straight from South Jersey. White t-shirt, tight on his body, you know, slick back, black hair. And we get to Jimmy's spot, and it's this construction site. And he says, let's just go knock on the door. And I'm like,
the audacity of him as a white man to be able to do that.
And he was like, the worst thing they can tell us is no.
Yeah.
And, you know, and so he goes up there and knocks on the door, and he's in this tight white t-shirt, and I'm in my cream colored jeans and my blue linen shirt, and they thought we were this couple. And so they wanted to show us the condos, the potential condos. And I was like, no, I'm a writer and I want to write. And so it was just this really fascinating moment. But I think you're right. There were these moments where I felt like he was guiding me. When I was writing, Reverend Barber sent me a saint's candle while I was writing. I burned one down, and then he sent me another one. And so Jimmy was right next to me. Right. And I was, of course, drinking too much at the same time, drinking too much Irish whiskey.
No such thing. No such thing.
So, but it was, you're right. You're right. So right. Yeah. He was there.
Well, kudos to you, because I like I said, I felt him. I saw him. There were parts I was reading, I said, nope, this is Jimmy right here talking straight through. And it's interesting because you have similar backgrounds, right? You being from the South as well. I mean, although he's from New York, but, you know, having fear of your father, having a base in the church. I mean, you studied theology. He was a minister at a young age. You know, there's definitely parallels within your lifestyles that, you know, as far as just the way you lived your lives. And what I love is how you liken some of his work to a John Coltrane song. And I said, John Coltrane. I think Thelonious Monk for me, because Thelonious Monk with the way he hits the piano, right? That crashing, but still is melodic. That was James Baldwin for me. He is the title of Thelonious Monk's song, Straight No Chaser. And that's him. And that's how I, you know, watching his speeches, listening to his interviews, he was always just, I'm giving it to you like this, you take it how you want it. This is me, here I am.
Well, you know, that makes a lot of sense to me,
right.
Daphne. But let me explain why I invoked Coltrane in the beginning. So it's the Love Supreme track, and it's the track Pursuance.
I know that one, yeah.
And Pursuance, and what I'm trying to do is to say to folk, look, let's not separate early Baldwin, late Baldwin. Let's think about the continuity of theme, that Baldwin is preoccupied with questions of identity, questions of history, questions of agency. He's going to think about these things differently under different material conditions. So what does it mean to think about identity and agency and history in the context of 1950? Or when he wrote Evidence of, you know, Everybody's Protest novel, 1948, 1949, as a young man. And what does it mean for him to think about those questions, those very same questions, in the context of the Black Power movement, or in the context of Ronald Reagan's election? The material condition will shift the emphasis. So I wanted people to hear the continuity. So when you listen to Pursuance, you hear this da 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 da.
It's continuous. It's like, for me, Pursuance is a hamster wheel.
Right. And then at the end, it almost sounds like sheets of sound, right?
Yeah.
And this is what people think. Baldwin's anger has overwhelmed. Nah, keep listening. You're gonna hear it. Keep listening.
I've listened to it a few times to really let it sink in, and I realized I can see where you're going with this. And, you know, and then for me, I was thinking about it more because I'm also a jazz fan, as you see. I mean, I just said Thelonious Monk here, but I was like, no, I think if I had to really call it, I'd say he's Straight No Chaser.
That's true.
He's that. He's definitely that.
True.
Cool.
Absolutely.
So moving along, again, likening you to Mr. Baldwin, he left to France, right? Because he felt like if he didn't, he was going to die, which I can totally understand, having no escape. And also with that, he decided that was the best way for him to really view and see America. And as we've all traveled, we know when you leave this country or even your state, you then have a different sense of love and appreciation, despite whatever's going on within your home, for that place. But he said it was a way to re-examine America and see it from a different perspective. You then went to Germany, to Heidelberg, and penned this book. So talk to me about that experience, especially your first few hours of even being there and witnessing a Black man being, you know, held down by 4 cops. What was that like for you? And did you feel that Mr. Baldwin his spirit was on you then? Do you think that was by accident?
Well, I don't know. I knew I had to write the book outside of the United States. So I initially I got an apartment in St. Thomas, and it was a beautiful, beautiful flat looking out on the Caribbean Sea. And, you know, I finished a small book entitled An Uncommon Faith. And I was just about to get going on Begin Again, or at least try to. And then Hurricane Maria blew me back into the States. You know? And so I got this invitation to go to Heidelberg, and it came at the right time because I had hit a wall. Because initially I was going to write an intellectual biography of Baldwin, and it was going to be, you know, let me explain the complexities of this man's intellectual work. But, you know, the archive wasn't giving anything to me, because most of Baldwin's letters it's all of that stuff is embargoed for the next 30 years. So you won't, you have the material at the Schomburg, you have the material at the Smithsonian and Emory, but the later stuff we won't get that definitive biography of Baldwin until 30 years from now. So I'm in Heidelberg, Daphne, and I'm like, I done signed this big ass contract. And we're a year in. I haven't written a thing. So I'm flying over and I'm thinking about this. And so I land and I'm not in Heidelberg an hour. I'm going to the Altstadt, which is the old city. And boom, I hear this curdling scream. And I follow people's eyes and I see this Black man on the ground with his pants halfway down his legs. Police got him, And I'm like, wow. So I go right back to my apartment. I start writing. And the section about this in the book, I wrote that day, right? And then while I'm in Heidelberg, I don't have language because I could read a little German, but I can't speak it and don't understand it. So I'm quiet.
Similar to him when he first landed in France.
He didn't speak
the language.
And so what it did, it heightened my perception. So I'm taking in the landscape. I'm hearing the language. I'm hearing its pitches, its rhythm. Yeah. I'm trying to read inscrutable faces. So I'm paying, it generates this new attentiveness in me, And I remember someone told me there was a soul food restaurant. And I said, okay, so I'm going into this, and I go into the soul food spot. And as I'm walking in, I see a Black woman with a afro looking like Angela Davis, nice. a pick with the Black Power fist on it. It's red, black, and green. But when I walk in, I hear Al Green, I hear the OJs, but it's an Ethiopian restaurant.
Okay.
Right? So I'm like, this is deep. And they're so excited I'm there, but it's Ethiopian food adjusted for the German palate. So I'm noticing all of this stuff, and it shows up in the prose in terms of the attention to detail. And plus, I was alone. I would teach my class and then go back to my spot, pour myself a nice stiff Irish whiskey, and then get to work.
Right.
And so I don't know, the book, the organization of the book happens there. Okay. I figured out the hook there. And it was from there that I went to Nice. So I flew from Heidelberg to Nice and then drove to St. Paul de Vence. So it's in that space outside of the US that I was able to think about the place much more differently, much more, I think, insightfully.
I don't think any of that was by accident. I think that was pure fate. All of it happened for a reason. And I think that was what helped really for you to tell James Baldwin's story. I think having to share a similar experience. I mean, you weren't in France, but you went, right? You had that same experience as far as being silent, not having to speak the language, being by yourself, no different than his experience when he first landed over there. Right. So moving on, it's been said too that James Baldwin's work has been described as prophetic. Do you agree that his statement of being prophetic believes that, I believe, if anything, he was making more of an observation, pushing us to change, being change agents in the course of America, especially with the title, right? Being Begin Again, James Baldwin's America and its urgent lessons for our own. Do you think that he lived in a different America than we did, than I do, or you do?
Yes. To a certain degree, but the through line of America is the same, And when you think about the through line, if the through line of America is this belief that white people matter more than others.
Yeah.
And that belief organizes our social, political, and economic arrangements. It is the source of the distribution of advantage and disadvantage. It just looks differently under different conditions.
Yeah.
So what the value gap is going to look like in the context of slavery is going to be very different than what it looks like with Barack Obama in the White House, or a Black woman as the vice president. So we still live in a society where white people are valued more than others. And the mob that sacked the Capitol on January 6th, they sacked the Capitol in the name of the belief, I think, that this nation must remain a white nation in the vein of old Europe.
Yeah.
So to the extent to which we still live in a society organized by that sentiment, that refusal, that insidious belief, then there is something similar. But Baldwin had this wonderful formulation. He says the horror of America is that it's always changing, but America never changes.
Yes.
You see? So I don't want to say that the world that my dad grew up in Mississippi is the same as my world. My dad couldn't go to Princeton, and here I am, a university professor at Princeton. So you do violence to the reality of Black life to say nothing has changed. But, this idea that white folks ought to be valued differently still affects us, still shapes the environment within which we have to raise our children. It's snuffing out dreams day in and day out,
And that's for me, and this is where I find it is prophetic, but yet I think that James Baldwin's works was more of a tough love for us, because I think what he wanted us to do is to love ourselves more because we are not loved by them. And we're told this. I mean, he was told all the time he was ugly. He estimated his own value based off of other people's perceptions of him. And I think that because of that, his works pushed us to not only look inwardly, because we have to fix ourselves in order to fix everything else, but to love ourselves in this. To basically, what you estimate to all the time is about rejecting the lie that we are not less than, that we are not necessarily superior, but of equal value to them, and to not allow ourselves to view ourselves as how they see us. And I think that he was forcing us to do that. Unfortunately, though, I find that it's still, I do believe that we are living in the same America as he has. Because even though it's not that so much that it's changed, there are changes, but over the underlying compass is that it's still the same, right? We're still considered a less than or other people, if you will. We're still not afforded certain opportunities. We're still fighting for just basic rights in this country, even though that there are laws in place and systems in place. There are people, as we saw on January 6th, who are still fighting against that. So, all right, moving forward, because I could go deep into this, because I lately have been, I gifted my husband a compilation of James Baldwin's essays and books after George Floyd passed. Because it was gut-wrenching for all of us, yes, but watching my husband break down emotionally, I just didn't know what to do. Like, as a woman, you're like, okay, we need to fix this, but I just didn't know in my own home how to address this. And the first thing that came to mind was get him a James Baldwin book. And I did, and I gave it to him, and I said, I hope he can speak to you in ways that I can't, in order to help you cope through what we're experiencing right now. And he sat in our backyard every day and just read through it. And I saw a small healing, or at least how to cope with it. So I will always be indebted to James Baldwin for that, because he did something that I never could. So moving on with that, basically, I think that Mr. Baldwin was very vocal, right? In his works and his speaking engagements, just as much as our leaders of our civil rights, such as Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, Medgar Evers, also being his friends. But in the grand scheme of it all, if you look at the history, looking at Black Panthers, looking at our leaders, he didn't seem as threatening to the white man, right? To our government. They looked into him, sure, they recorded him. But I think, and I don't know if you agree with this, that if anything, he didn't seem as threatening because he was a gay man. Because even amongst his own people, they were hesitant of dealing with him. What do you think about that?
Oh no, his sexuality was definitely threatening. No, you just got to understand. You got to understand the depth of Baldwin's courage. Right. So you think about his first novel is What? Go Tell It on the Mountain. It's a success. Notes of a Native Son. It's a success. And usually in the publishing industry, when you write that successful book, they want you to keep writing. It's like the music industry. Just hit that. That's your formula. Keep pushing it through.
Oh, I work in the music industry, I know.
Yeah, but Baldwin's second novel is Giovanni's Room. It is a novel published in 1956 about same-sex love. He says it's a novel about love. You know, same sex doesn't really matter. It's a novel about love. So much so that the US wouldn't publish it. He has to get it published in the UK. And he's out there all by his damn self.
Yeah.
When I interviewed Angela Davis, she was like, in so many ways, he was out there all alone. And when you look at his FBI file, it's thick.
Yeah.
So he's under constant surveillance. And there's a moment in his life where he actually thinks his fate will be that of Malcolm's and Medgar's. He thinks he's going to get killed. There's a conference where he's in Florida, St. Augustine, Florida. And you could find it's at the end. They actually show this video footage at the end of the film. I Heard It Through the Grapevine. He's speaking with Chinua Achebe is there. He's speaking. Suddenly, the Klan breaks through the microphone system and starts speaking, saying, "Mr. Baldwin, you know you're not supposed to be talking, blah, 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 blah." And Jimmy thinks he's going to get killed right there, and he doesn't budge.
Yeah.
So J. Edgar Hoover, given his own repressed and closeted life, saw him as this kind of perversion and danger. So he's an artist. He bears witness. But the way in which Baldwin situated himself, many across a number of different sectors saw him as threatening. And then in the context of the Black Power movement, or even before the Black Power movement, there are those, Bayard Rustin has to be closeted. He has to mute his sexuality. Baldwin ain't muting nothing.
No.
And King is unsettled. And he's unsettled probably because, not just simply because of his sexuality, he's probably unsettled too because of the class position. Baldwin's not from Sugar Hill.
No.
He's from that hood part of Harlem.
Yeah.
Right, back in the day, right? So he's coming from a family of 9 who barely ate. This ain't Langston Hughes's New York, right? And so that class the class tension, as well as the tension around sexual with Eldridge Cleaver, it's just Baldwin's misfittedness, his queerness unsettles Eldridge Cleaver, probably because of Eldridge Cleaver's own desires.
Yeah.
You see, so I think how we parse the verb threatening, in some ways he was extraordinarily threatening because he unsettled categories. He was so misfitted that the moment he entered the space, he queered everything around him.
Yeah.
And then of course his brilliance meant that you had to deal with it.
We're gonna play a little game right now. So trivia question. I'm gonna recite a poem or an excerpt from a poem, and I want you to tell me who this poet is. Your prize will be an honorary member of GOG Book Club.
Okay, I don't know. I don't read a lot of poetry, so let me see if I can get this.
They will see how beautiful we are and be ashamed. I too am America. Who wrote that?
That's Langston Hughes.
There we go.
I'm an honorary member.
You are now officially the honorary member of GOG. So I picked this because I noticed that your son's name Langston.
Absolutely.
So I figured he was your favorite poet. Will he be the topic of your next book?
No.
Okay.
No, we named our son Langston. We named him Langston Ellis. His middle name is short for Ralph Ellison, and we wanted him every time he said his name to have the power of the tradition behind it.
I love it.
Because the world is coming at you so hard. Baldwin, as Baldwin writes in The Uses of the Blues, whatever the Negro problem is, every Negro mother, quote unquote, and every Negro father, quote unquote, has to face that child who has to grow up in a world that despises him or her. And we have to keep that child from despising themselves, right? Or herself, right?
I'm glad
And
you
so
said that.
we named him Langston Ellis. Whenever he hears Langston Ellis, he thinks I'm yelling or something. But we named him Langston because, you know, every time he says it, you got to stand upright, you know. But my next book is actually it's part of this trilogy. It's the follow-up to Begin Again. So we'll see what happens.
Nice. I'm interested to hear that. But I'm glad you talked about that because I wanted to bring up something that may be a little bit painful. So let me know if you're not comfortable talking about it. But your son was harassed by police as a student at Brown University. And you talked about that experience after he, in an interview actually, and how you handled that. And you said that after you got that call, you looked to turn outward to deal with that trauma. Explain to us what does that look like as parents, as not just parents, but of people who have children, nieces, nephews, cousins, brothers, husbands in our lives, in dealing with our current affairs. How do you turn outward?
Right. One of the things that I wanted to do was to keep it from taking root in his spirit. Because, you know, there's nothing good that can come from hate and anger and rage that is churning in the inside. And I learned that from Jimmy, right? Even, you know, in 1968, in the interview in Esquire magazine, when they said, what would you say to the young folk who are burning down cities and the like? And Baldwin says, well, I certainly wouldn't tell them that they shouldn't pick up the gun.
Right.
But I would tell them that if they're gonna blow somebody's brains out, and it might come to that, don't hate.
Not to hate them. Yeah.
Remember? So part of what I was trying to do in that moment is to get him not to get the rage, not to settle in his gut, but to then focus. You play ball. You're supposed to be you're D1 caliber basketball player in high school. Look at your partners in Trenton. Look at your partners in Newark. Look what they go through. You experience this in this place at this time. Think of how often they experience it at the Fifth Ward in Trenton,
Yeah.
Right. So I remember this is one story. I didn't write about this, but he came home one summer from school and he was working at this lobbying firm, progressive firm, and they were lobbying at the state capitol in Trenton around criminal justice reform. And, you know, he was so excited because they were going to the state capitol. And he had put on that tight H&M suit, them tight suits that these kids wear. I don't know how they wear those things. And he put it on, got in his little Honda Civic, and he was going to drive to the Capitol because they were going to lobby. And then, you know, my son is about 6'2". You know, he came in and I immediately saw something was wrong. So what's going on? And he said, Dad, I'm trying to get to the Capitol. I'm trying to find a place to park. And this police officer just stops and starts screaming on me. I said, for what? He said, I ignored him. So he screams on me, calls me all kinds of names, and then tells me to go park somewhere. So I drive to go park where he told me. And Dad, I got stopped again by another cop. Now he's telling me this, his eyes are bloodshot red, veins are popping through this, you know, and I'm like, what's going on? Okay, tell me. He said, then I got stopped again. And then the cop starts cussing me out again. And then he tells me to go park somewhere. So I drive to go park where the guy tells me. And Dad, I got stopped again.
Oh my God.
And the cop, and then, no, excuse my language, everybody. And the cop asked me, who's my PO, Dad? He asked me, who was my fucking PO? And tears are running down his eyes, right? And I'm sitting here looking at my baby, the only one I got.
Yeah.
The only one I got.
Yeah.
And he's like, only thing I could do is reach for my 25 Macallan. Pour single malt. Let's go. Come on, let's talk this through.
Yeah.
Because at that moment, the rage can take root, and it then can become consuming.
Yeah.
And that's why Baldwin had to leave in 48.
Yeah.
Because he said, if I don't leave, I'm either going to kill somebody or somebody going to kill me.
Right.
So at that moment, you know, you realize that your babies are always in peril.
Yeah.
And so you have to figure out in those moments how to equip them to survive this so that they can flourish and become who God has called them to be.
Thank you for that. And thank you for sharing that story with us. I'm sure I know it's an important thing to be able to share these anecdotes, and it's unfortunate that they are that we have to talk about this. But I think it's helpful for someone like yourself to share that story, because I'm sure every single one of us has had some kind of experience. And I know for me, getting pulled over, forget about it. I've been almost arrested a few times because of the things that's been told to me just for driving. So thank you. But within that, what do you think? You mentioned something about Black mythical bullshit in respect to the Black Lives Matter, and so I'm gonna ask you like a kind of loaded question here, but
Sure.
hey, what do you mean by that, or what did Jazz mean by that, and also what do you think he would say today in respect to Black Lives Matter and our movement?
So I'm always hesitant to try to anticipate his words. I know what I've learned from it.
Mm.
And, you know, he's going to tell us to, you know, what I've learned is that we have to bear witness. We have to tell the truth. We have to avoid the traps that can get us caught into these categories that blind us to the complexity of who we are as human beings, right? That we can't retreat to the safety of illusions and the comfort of illusions, right? So there's a sense in which we have to risk everything in this moment. And many people who are part of Black Lives Matter are doing just that for a more just world in some ways. But let me explain something about what Jimmy meant by this mystical black bullshit. I opened the book in chapter 1 with a story of Baldwin's talking to students from Howard.
Yeah.
And these are SNCC veterans who come out of NAG, which is the student organization at Howard University, and Stokely Carmichael, who would later become Kwame Ture, Muriel Tillinghast, Michael Thelwell, a whole bunch of just brilliant people. And he says to them, if you promise me that you don't believe, that you will refuse to believe what the world says about you, I promise you I will never betray you. That's what he says to them. And Kwame Ture said that he never did. Stokely Carmichael said he never turned his back on. Now, as these young folk, because he knew what they were facing in the bowels of the South, many of them risking their lives nonviolently, and he saw them transform. He knew why in 1966 on the top of that bus in Greenwood, Mississippi in June that Stokely Carmichael and Willie Ricks screamed Black Power. I'm not going to jail anymore. We're not talking freedom now, we're talking Black Power. So he understood why they transitioned, why the shift. But he didn't want the students, the young folk, to fall into the trap of believing that Blackness that existed apart from our individual experiences defined who we are. There's no necessary relationship. Let me just be clear. There's no necessary relationship between being Black and holding a progressive politics. When people say to me all the time, well, you know, a lot of Black men voted for Donald Trump. And I'm like, white people don't have a monopoly on selfishness and greed?
No.
So when he says mystical black bullshit, what he's saying is that you posit some idea of Blackness that exists above and apart from the everyday experiences of ordinary people. And then you presume by virtue of that Blackness that we are all the same and connected. No. You can't do, you got to deal with the complexity of who we are. And so that mystical black bullshit is this presumption that, you know, by definition, we ought to, hold the same views. No, that's dangerous.
But it's interesting because a lot of times we do that. We automatically assume because you're Black, you're supposed to subscribe to the same schools of thought. I remember during Obama's administration, or prior to, when he was, running for office, there was a lot of infighting. I mean, I myself, I can actually admit in the very beginning, I wasn't gonna vote for Barack Obama. I wasn't. It took one speech for me to change my mind. Because I said, well, I can't just vote for the man because he's Black. What does that mean to me?
Right.
I've seen Black leaders. I've seen what they've done or not do, right? And so I was like, I don't know him enough.
Right.
I did. I knew Hillary. And as a woman, I was like, and I suffered with the intersectionality of being a Black woman because I was on the fray. Like, all right, where there's a Black man, there's a white woman. Where do I fall in all of that? I knew her. I didn't know much about him. It took one speech and I said, oh, forget it. But there's been, ever since, there's conversation. And I know you're very critical of Barack. And hey, I get it, you know. I wanted to just impose that, you know, it's unfortunate that as a people that we have these expectations of each other, which also keeps us from actually progressing. I feel. I have one more question, and I'm gonna have to turn it over to Julia because I could talk to you all day.
I'm having so much fun. Thank you.
Appreciate you. So with all that being said, and everyone who's out there watching, please pick up this book because it's important. I think it's something that you must have on your bookshelf, not just for your Zoom calls, but also to educate yourself and get to know James Baldwin from a different perspective than what we have been taught. But what do you think James Baldwin would say about Begin Again?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know.
I think he speaks to you in some form or fashion. He does speak to you. So if you don't know, that should be your homework. I want you to meditate on.
It all depends on what kind of mood he's in, you know. It all depends. But you know, I think I know what I've done.
Right.
And you know, there's this moment. There's these liberatory moments, Daphne. One moment I was wrestling with Jimmy, and he was getting the best of me. And I came across this conversation. I had read it on the page, but I'd never seen the conversation between him and Nikki Giovanni.
I love that interview.
Yeah.
Love that interview. Oh my God.
And you know, Jimmy is so generous, and Nikki Giovanni is so brilliant and brash. And you know, he's talking about the usual thing where he inhabits this kind of patriarchal formulation about having to go to work and then come home. And she says, lie to me.
Yeah.
Lie to me. And he looks so confused. I can't. And she said, no, lie to me. You go do this, that, and the other.
You do it outside.
Yeah, but you're going to come home and take it out on my head? No, lie to me. And the way she spoke back to him.
Yeah.
So I hope that he would like Begin Again. But if he didn't like it, I'm ready to argue with him.
I love that.
Yeah.
Well, Eddie, it has been such a pleasure. You have no idea. I mean, I manifested this conversation. I admire you so much. I think the way you read people on television with class and dignity you represent us well.
Thank you.
And I appreciate you standing on your own stances and really telling the story. And showing us a different side of Jimmy, as you lovingly call him. I mean, I went down a rabbit hole myself. I had to go to therapy about it because I had to deal with a lot of internal things on my own. But I'm going to turn it over to my lovely co-host, Julia Chance, to do the Q&A.
Thank you, Sister Daphne. I appreciate you.
Yeah.
Appreciate you.
Thank you, Daphne. This has been a great conversation thus far. Hi, Eddie. I have some questions from the audience. The first question is from Martha. She says, Dr. Glaude, what is the biggest thing you learned about yourself with this experience of writing this book? You've talked a little bit about what you've learned from Jimmy, what you've learned about Jimmy and from Jimmy. What have you learned about yourself in writing this book?
Thank you. That's a great question. Beyond the fact that I'm a vulnerable little boy, that I'm a writer, that I'm an artist, right? That I'm not just a scholar, right? That I wanted to announce to the world and that I'm a writer, that I construct, that I can put a sentence on the page, And I learned by taking risks. Actually, Jimmy kicked me in my behind that I could actually do it. Yeah, that's what I learned.
Okay, this question has a long preface, so bear with me. Barack Obama's historic run for president, his 2 terms in office, and certainly the racial vitriol and division stirred by the last administration has brought a new generation of African-American pundits into prominence, like Melissa Harris Perry, who had her own show on MSNBC, Mark Lamont Hill, Ibram X. Kendi, Imani Perry, Brittany Cooper, Peniel Joseph, and you, a regular contributor on Morning Joe. Are we experiencing a golden age of Black scholars beyond the ivory tower? And how can we sustain that?
I don't know, I don't know, because during the Obama years, I was in the woodshed working on my craft, because I had basically been blackballed.
How so? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, because I was critical of Obama. I had written, because when Obama emerged, I was actually running around the country trying, because I had been a part of helping construct the Covenant with Black America. You remember that?
Yes, I do. Could you speak a little bit about that? Covenant with Black America was...
This is before Tavis Smiley's dissent, but there's this moment when we used to have these State of the Black Union events on C-SPAN, and we would basically spend the entire day with Black thought leaders and Black leaders from around the country gathered, and people would be glued to the television as we dealt with and grappled with what Black America faced. And this usually happened right after the State of the Union, right? So Tavis Smiley put that between the covers of a book, and we went around the country holding town hall meetings. And then we published the Covenant in Action afterwards. And we were going around, this is your card. If somebody wants to talk about Black, ask them where's their position on this, what's their position on that, right? And then Barack Obama emerged in the midst of that energy. And folk were like, Tavis, whatever you might think of him, he was like, yo, whatever you think of Obama, you still need to hold him to account, like Daphne, her initial response was, right? Once he got elected, I wasn't on television.
Mm-hmm.
There was a particular cohort of pundits who were in their orbit. Mm-hmm. Once he transitioned out of office, those pundits transitioned out. If you think about it.
A lot of them did.
A lot of them did. Some of them stayed. I actually you think about my entree into MSNBC. I didn't come through Melissa Harris Perry's show, or through Joy Reid's show, or through Chris Hayes or Rachel Maddow. I came through Morning Joe, the conservative show. And it was because I had written Democracy in Black. They were taken with my critique of Barack Obama, and boom, it opened. So I don't know if it's a golden age. It's a moment when a lot of folks are out here promoting their brand. I know that. And it's a moment where a lot of us might have an opportunity to have a platform. The question is, you have to judge what we're doing with it, right? So that's a long-winded answer to a long-winded way of saying, I'm not sure we're in a golden age. I don't know what it is yet. We might very well be in a nadir. But that's a whole different kind of conversation.
Okay. Speaking of your being on television and such, how do you navigate between your roles as a professor, a researcher, a historical author, and social commentator?
Well, I'm a pragmatist by temperament, and a philosophical pragmatist. And what that means is that, the arc of my work is always to address a broader public. I take myself to be someone who's always trying to think carefully in public with others, bringing my specific skill set to bear on issues. And so I think there's a seamless relationship between all of these various spheres that I inhabit. What I try to do in the context of my commentary is to figure out how to bring my bibliography, all the stuff I read, all the stuff that's in my head, how do I bring it to bear on something in front of me? How can I fit it within the context of a soundbite? How do I exhibit the habit of listening in the moment? The moment I'm preoccupied with whether or not I've said something that's Eddie Glaude, the moment I'm done, I need to leave television. Part of what I try to do is to listen and answer in the moment, to offer the sound of the genuine in my response, and to try to be nuanced and complex within that short bounded space, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, when I say, for example, we should read the Republicans as the new redeemers, and people are like, what do you mean by new redeemers? And suddenly I got folk talking about Reconstruction in a different way, right?
Mm-hmm.
So seamless, trying to figure out, because what else should I be? What's the other reason why I'm there? To try to figure out how to bring my skill set to bear on the questions in front of us. That's what I try. Yeah.
Okay.
That's a great question.
Thanks. I have two questions that I'm going to combine because they're along the same lines, from Florence Garlick and another attendee who isn't named here. Where do you see this country headed as far as race is concerned? Are you hopeful or pessimistic about the future, given overt bigotry we're witnessing and the fact that this country not only recently elected Donald Trump, but has a white ethno-nationalist autocratic party that had disproportionate political power?
That's a great two questions. I don't know. It all depends on what we do.
Mm.
It's that moment in Toni Morrison's Nobel lecture. It's in our hands. I'm not sure. The country can go to hell, or we can actually imagine ourselves otherwise. It seems to me that we're at that blues crossroads.
Mm-hmm.
Am I hopeful or am I pessimistic? I'm never pessimistic, but my hope is a kind of blues-soaked hope. That's that B.B. King kind of hope. Nobody loves me but my mother, and she could be jiving too kind of hope. So our past suggests that we're not going to do well, but human beings can be miraculous. So if we show up, who knows? Who knows? So I'm hopeful, but remember what Du Bois says in The Souls of Black Folk? It's a hope not hopeless, but unhopeful.
Mm.
That's my hope. Yeah.
You had some strong opinions about voting back in 2016.
I did.
You did. I remember you talking about it. And I don't want to take it out of context, but would you talk a little bit? You felt that Black people voting Democratic should vote down ballot, but
unless the party actually stepped to its right. Because I believe that the story about where we are as a nation now involves Clintonism, the ideology, not just the personalities.
So when Clinton and Trump were running, you were advising Black people not to vote?
No.
Okay.
What I did, I advised them, if you were in a decidedly red state, where it looked as if, like if you were in Mississippi where my mom lived,
Mm-hmm.
Vote your conscience, because you could actually affect the delegates at the 2020 convention. I was trying to figure out how we could break the back of this neoliberal Democratic Leadership Council agenda that has had the Democratic Party by the neck, by the throat. And so I wanted us to turn out. I actually wanted organizers to get us to turn out to vote down ballot, and as if Barack Obama was on the ticket. Because I honestly didn't believe, I actually write about this as a kind of mea culpa and begin again. I honestly didn't believe white folks were going to elect this man.
Right.
And so I was like, here's a chance to really break the back of Clintonism. But what you get is really interesting. You get folk who get amnesia, who want to get invitations to the White House.
Right.
They're more interested in being court prophets than they are in actually creating the conditions for the improvement of the most vulnerable among us. So I was arguing, vote your conscience if you're in a red state. I wrote a piece with Fred Harrison, the political theorist out of Columbia, in Time magazine, where we were trying to offer a kind of model for organizers, right, to do this work. But in 2016, I was like, you got to vote for Biden. You got to vote. Can't let this fool another 4 years. You can't trust white people either in this regard.
Right. Linda Duggins asked, how difficult or not was the process for getting this book acquired and published? And it's out in this period where, you know, James Baldwin is enjoying like a renaissance, starting with like Raoul Peck's movie, I Am Not Your Negro. You know, people are quoting him and everything. So when did you decide to do this? When did you start?
So after I wrote Democracy in Black came out in 2016, 2015, somewhere around that area. And so I wanted to write this second book. And they didn't want me to write, because I became this pundit, right? After that, they didn't want me to write a book about, about anyone. Why would you want to, given your voice and its importance in this political moment, why would you want to write about somebody else? And I was like, well, because he's important. And so they trusted me enough to allow me to write about the book as I had initially conceived it. Once the book the idea of the book transformed, we knew we had something. So it wasn't, they were, these presses, trade presses, they knew I had a platform. So they knew we could move books. So they were like, just let's come up with a book that you can move, because we know you have the platform to move it. That's what they were thinking, I think. That's my assumption. But we haven't announced it yet, but I just signed a 2-book deal with Crown for the third volume in the trilogy and a memoir. So we'll see what happens.
Well, thanks for revealing it to us. You heard it here first, folks. Heard it here first. I have time for one more question. This is from Daphne Williams. If you could tell your younger writing self anything, what would it be?
Don't fall for the okie doke of academic writing. Trust yourself. Keep writing for your mama. Right. So my mom has a 9th grade education. And she loved Begin Again. She loved it. She said, I read it from cover to cover. So I would tell my younger self, don't fall for the okie doke. Brilliance is not found in obscurity. It's found in clarity. So be clear, be concise, and be compelling. But most of all, be true to yourself. Be the poet that you know you can be. That's what I would tell myself.
Cool. Well, with that, we thank you, Eddie Glaude. We really enjoyed this conversation, and we'll be looking for you on TV, and we look forward to your future books.
Thank y'all, and thank y'all for taking the time. I really appreciate you. Appreciate you, Julie. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody.
Take care, and everyone else, look for our next conversations in March when we focus on women in publishing.
Thank you, Eddie.
Thank you, Daphne. Take care.
Gifts